When your narrative starts to crumble, every attempt you had made to use leverage to get what you wanted will fail. That's what Vladimir Putin is finding out the hard way, as his Kremlin cronies have been making false claims of sweeping advances throughout Ukraine, all to buy Putin more bargaining power at the peace negotiating table. Ukraine isn't allowing Putin to tell the story he wants to tell. Instead, it's striking back hard. Kupiansk is one of the cities that Russia claims to have taken. Ukraine just destroyed that claim by ripping through Russia's defenses in the city, liberating it in a brutal push to demonstrate that Russia is nowhere near as powerful as Putin claims. It all started a little over 2 years ago. That's according to the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, which says that Russia began its campaign to take Kupiansk back in October 2023. The city had once been in Russia's hands during the early weeks of Putin's Ukraine invasion, only for it to be liberated by Ukraine. What followed October 2023 was several campaigns designed to take the city, all of which fell to the strength of Ukraine's defenses. No matter how hard they tried, the ISW says Russia's forces had failed to encircle the city, which would give them a foothold in Kharkiv, despite 22 months of fighting. But finally, after churning through thousands of soldiers and untold amounts of equipment, Russia did it. Kupiansk fell. Well, according to Russia. On November 21st, the Kyiv Post reported that Russian General Valery Gerasimov had told Putin that Russia had finally taken Kupiansk during a televised address held on the previous day. Units from groups of forces west liberated the city of Kupiansk and are continuing the destruction of formations of the armed forces of Ukraine on the left bank of the Oskil River, Gerasimov declared almost matter-of-factly, as though the fall of the city had been an inevitability rather than a 2-year campaign that saw Russia fail again and again. The statement was aired across all of Russia's state-controlled media, and Putin was more than happy to feed the narrative his general had created. Ever the performative leader, Putin was decked out in military fatigues as he praised his general for the Russian army's accomplishments and lauded the damage done to the criminal Kyiv regime. Putin even followed up on Gerasimov's statement asking, "That means it's over, it's finished, it's under our control completely." Gerasimov offered a confirmation stating, "Yes sir, exactly so, the city is fully under our control." The picture had been painted. Putin's marauding forces had succeeded after 2 years of fighting, and Kupiansk had fallen. The televised briefing was Russia's way of letting Ukraine know that one of its major cities was in Russian hands, and the rest of Kharkiv would be next. There was just one problem: Kupiansk hadn't fallen. But the Ukrainian military, independent observation groups, numerous eyewitnesses on the ground, and even some pro-Russia mill bloggers sharply contradict the Kremlin claim, the Kyiv Post reports. But that didn't stop Putin from trying to further the story that the Kremlin had crafted out of thin air. As Le Monde reports, December 2nd saw Putin follow up on the Russian claims that Kupiansk had fallen, with an invitation extended to reporters from other countries and even Ukraine, so that they might see for themselves that Russia was telling the truth. The invitation was real, but the Kremlin never went so far as to actually facilitate the entry of journalists into the war-torn city of Kupiansk, because doing so would lead to the entire charade falling apart. Still, there was one man who took Putin up on his offer, and it was the last man that Russia's president ever expected to show up: Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. On December 12th, Zelensky himself headed to Kupiansk in a visit that contradicted everything that the Kremlin claimed about the city being in Russian hands. Zelensky even published a video address during which he used the opportunity to both disprove the Kremlin and deliver a message to Ukraine's soldiers. Ukraine's president stood in a location that Le Monde claims is just 2.6 kilometers or 1.6 miles from Kupiansk's central square. Wearing a bulletproof vest and standing next to a sign that welcomes people to Kupiansk, Zelensky said, "Today, it's extremely important to achieve results on the front lines so that Ukraine can achieve results in diplomacy. That's how it works. All our strong positions within the country are strong positions in the talks on ending the war." Zelensky also published his video to X, along with a statement clearly directed at Putin and anybody who has been swallowing the Kupiansk narrative that the Kremlin has fed to them. "The Russians kept going on about Kupiansk. The reality speaks for itself. I visited our troops and congratulated them. Thank you to each and every warrior." Zelensky is right. The reality is that Ukraine's president was able to film himself delivering an address less than 2 miles away from the center of a city Russia claims to fully control. Le Monde points out that Zelensky ventured into what should have been a death zone that placed him within range of Russian drones and loitering munitions, yet he came out unscathed. This isn't to say there was no risk. The noises in the background of the Ukrainian president's video show that fighting is ongoing in Kupiansk. But then that's the point. The fighting is ongoing. Far from the Russian claims of full control of the city, Kupiansk is still being fought over, to the point that no less than Ukraine's president can travel almost to the city's center to film footage. That shouldn't happen. It only did for two reasons. One, Putin and his Kremlin cronies have lied constantly about the Kupiansk situation. And two, Ukraine has been making gains in the Kupiansk direction that the Kremlin definitely doesn't want anybody to know about. Those gains came to a head on December 12th when Ukraine carried out a sweeping operation that liberated huge portions of Kupiansk. RBC Ukraine offers a full report noting that December 12th saw Ukraine complete the encirclement of Russian forces in the city that Putin has twice claimed to have been liberated from Ukraine. Leading the operation was the 2nd Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine, which is also known as the Katyia Brigade, RBC Ukraine adds. Established in March 2022, the brigade numbers anywhere between 1,500 and 5,000 soldiers, and it operates almost exclusively in the Kharkiv region. Before December 12th, the brigade had taken part in numerous counteroffensives that reversed Russian gains made during the early months of Putin's invasion. It also took part in the defense of Bakhmut. The Katyia Brigade is one of Ukraine's most experienced and battle-hardened units. Russia's forces attempting to occupy Kupiansk discovered that the hard way on December 12th. Ukraine has managed to entrap hundreds of Russia's soldiers in Kupiansk, RBC Ukraine reports. Those soldiers will become the Katyia Brigade's main targets after the brigade launched a devastating series of counterattacks that destroyed the Russian positions supporting the encircled soldiers. Ukraine has now completely cleared the Yuveleny residential district of Kupiansk in a sweeping series of attacks that killed over 1,000 Russian soldiers. Of course, the argument could be made that this would only be a temporary liberation on Ukraine's part. After all, if Russia had managed to insert troops this deep into Kupiansk once, it could do so again. Only that isn't the case. One of Russia's main methods for getting soldiers into Kupiansk was to have them sneak through a cramped and dangerous pipeline. That pipe has been used as a strange form of logistical artery for Russia's forces in Kupiansk and the wider Kharkiv region. It had also allowed Putin's forces to exit on the northern outskirts of Kupiansk, from where they could launch assaults on the city. That pipeline has just been destroyed. On December 14th, Defense Express reported that Ukraine's Kupiansk defenders had demolished the pipeline Russia was using to feed troops and supplies into Kupiansk. This time, it was Ukraine's Achilles regiment that did the hard work, having earlier identified the pipeline that Russia's forces were using to keep their Kupiansk logistics running without fear of dealing with Ukraine's guns and drones. 3 tons of explosive later, the pipeline had been completely destroyed. Don't underestimate just how important this operation is, especially now that Ukraine is on the front foot in Kupiansk. With their supply lines cut off, the Russian forces still inside the city will quickly run out of ammunition and other equipment. That will make them easier prey for the Katyia Brigade, as the Russian defense will deteriorate quickly without its logistical lifeline. Russia will still attempt supply runs, of course, only now its soldiers have to undertake those runs above ground, where they'll be exposed to the drones and heavy guns of the Ukrainian military that is actively searching for any soldier attempting to support those in Kupiansk. What is currently a partial liberation of a city that never truly fell in the first place may become much more. Ukraine has created the perfect scenario for its soldiers to fully reclaim Kupiansk, thus reversing every gain that Russia has made after 2 years of fighting for the city. Unlike Russia, Ukraine wants to offer as much proof as possible that it's done everything that it claims to have done. Zelensky filming a video in Kupiansk is a massive piece of evidence in its own right. However, that video isn't the only one to have emerged from the city over the last few days. Pravda shared another on December 12th, which features around 2.5 minutes of footage showcasing the brilliance and sometimes the brutality of Ukraine's Kupiansk counteroffensive. Published on YouTube by the Katyia Brigade, the video is a massive slap in Putin's face. At various points during the video, you can see Ukrainian soldiers actively laughing at Russia's claims that it has full control over Kupiansk. Those soldiers are operating in the very city that Putin and his cronies claim fell back in November. The description provided alongside the video also highlights an interesting comment that Putin made about Kupiansk prior to the liberation. If Kyiv does not want to discuss President Trump's proposal and refuses to do so, then both they and the European warmongers should understand that the events that took place in Kupiansk will inevitably be repeated in other key sectors of the front, Russia's president claimed. Now that looks like a clear attempt to gain leverage for peace negotiations. We'll come back to that point in a moment. The video also highlights the many operations that have led to Kupiansk being in the position that it's currently in. Ukraine has completed a breakthrough that allowed it to reach the Oskil River, the video's description points out. Enemy supply routes into Kupiansk have all been blocked off, including the pipeline we mentioned earlier. Ukraine has already liberated several suburban villages, along with territory in Kupiansk north. Remember that this is where the pipeline that Ukraine destroyed fed Russia's soldiers, so Ukraine's liberation of blocks in that region of the city showcases just how quickly Russia's defenses have collapsed. Now, the 200 Russian soldiers encircled in Kupiansk are next on Ukraine's list. Those soldiers are trapped, helpless, completely cut off from their supplies. Far from holding a city that Russia claims to be under complete control, those soldiers are highlighting that Russia controls almost nothing. And it's all thanks to an operation that has been months in the making. That's according to Viktor Trehubov, who is the head of the communications department at Ukraine's Joint Forces grouping. Trehubov has commented on Ukraine's achievements in Kupiansk, as well as what they mean for Russia. If we include the planning stage, the operation began back in autumn, Trehubov revealed, suggesting that Ukraine has known how flimsy Russia's claim of controlling Kupiansk has been for almost half a year. Now that the counterattack has been launched, Putin's false statements have been revealed for the world to see. They are now in a difficult position politically, Trehubov says, because the leader of the Russian Federation made a statement and the president of Ukraine refuted it not only with words but also visually and physically. Now the Russians need to show the world that they can be trusted at all after such a bluff. It's only going to get worse for Russia from here. In a December 14th report, Euromaidan Press says that Ukraine's troops continue to advance in and around Kupiansk as of the creation of this video. The reclaiming of Yuvaleny, which we mentioned earlier, will likely prevent Russia's forces from sustaining its remaining positions in the south of Kupiansk, which likely offers a hint as to where the Katyr Brigade will next focus its efforts. Russia's forces are also trying to penetrate the city, though not in any particularly organized way. The best that Russia can muster is infiltration groups involving soldiers who are moving primarily on foot with no armor. Ukraine is stifling these infiltration events, which are only going to get weaker now that all of the supply routes into Kupiansk are under Ukraine's control. Kupiansk has fallen, all right. It's fallen right back into Ukraine's control, exposing Putin's narrative for the pack of lies that it is. The response to all of this in Russia has been furious, though none of that response has come from Russia's official sources. The country's defense ministry has been oddly quiet about the collapse of its forces in Kupiansk, as have Russia's state-run media outlets, Le Monde reports. It's almost as though both are trying to maintain a narrative that is actively crumbling before their eyes. Russia's military bloggers have been far more open, however. Taking advantage of the insufficient consolidation of Russian armed forces in the city, despite optimistic reports of its complete capture, the enemy launched a counterattack. A Telegram channel named Military Informant reports, before adding, "The enemy's objective is to cut the logistical link for the Russian armed forces garrison in the city center." If Ukraine is to be believed, the logistical link has already been cut. The garrison in the city center is now encircled. Another Russian telegram named Western Forces Group was far harsher on its country's forces, Le Monde says. The channel claims that everything is going badly for Russia, and it says that Ukraine has reclaimed the villages of Radkivka and Kindrashivka. Both were used by Russia as part of its Kupiansk logistics network. With the fall of those villages came Ukraine's ability to strengthen its foothold in the north of Kupiansk, leading to everything we now see. Russia has also claimed to have encircled 15 Ukrainian battalions in Kupiansk, the channel adds. Yet another lie. It's Russia's forces that are encircled, and support isn't coming. With the story set straight in Kupiansk, there are three impacts that we're likely to see in the coming months. The first of those impacts is that the liberation of large swathes of Kupiansk has taken leverage away from Putin at a time when he sorely needs it. As El Pai reports, Russia had been attempting to impose its version of a peace plan that, among other things, would have forced Ukraine to cede the Donbas region. To make that happen, Russia attempted advances on several fronts, the outlet said, with all designed to give the impression that Russia was making sweeping advances as peace talks progressed. These attempts to gain leverage are obvious. Ukraine has to cede now, Putin wants the world to believe, because Russia will just take what it wants if Ukraine doesn't hand the Donbas over. Russia has been pretty transparent over this leverage issue. Speaking about peace negotiations, the Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov said, "The progress and nature of the negotiations were influenced by the success of the Russian army on the battlefield in recent weeks. Our Russian soldiers, through their military exploits, have helped make the assessment of our foreign partners regarding the path to a peace settlement more appropriate." What will be the appropriate way to assess Russia's collapse in Kupiansk? The Kremlin has yet to provide an answer. That's because Russia's leadership knows that the country needs a peace plan much more than it wants to let on. The Jamestown Foundation highlighted this in a November report where it noted that the Kremlin is vulnerable due to a combination of money running low and active rebellion in some quarters of Russia. Wage arrears have surged, regional subsidies for recruits are being cut, and governors increasingly defy Kremlin directives. Recruitment shortfalls force reliance on reservists and coercive mobilization, while veterans fuel crime and radical nationalist movements, the foundation says. These are problems that Putin can't handle while the Ukraine war wages, making the leverage he just lost in Kupiansk a major setback to Putin's goal of maximizing Russian gains from any future peace. Secondly, on the impact front, the Kremlin's false narrative of sweeping advances has been shattered. On the same day that Ukraine launched its Kupiansk counterattack, Russia claimed that its forces had captured Siversk. However, as is so often the case with Russia, these claims aren't backed by any solid evidence, as the New Voice of Ukraine reports. The reality for Putin, according to the outlet, is that Russia has only made any noticeable progress across 6 of its 16 operational directions during all of 2025, which is why it's now so desperate to feed the sweeping advances narrative. These advances simply aren't being made. As with Kupiansk, Russia doesn't exercise full control in Siversk. In a separate report covering Russia's failure in Kupiansk, the New Voice of Ukraine explains the narrative that Putin is trying to create and why it's clearly false. According to ISW, Putin and the Russian leadership have attempted to portray the Ukrainian front line as being on the verge of collapse to pressure Kyiv and the West into making concessions, the outlet reports. But the Ukrainian counterattack in Kupiansk, coupled with resilient defense along the rest of the front line, shows this narrative to be false, the analysts concluded. For every claim of impending collapse that Russia makes, Ukraine is now responding with counterattacks and evidence of the lies that Putin is telling. This all plays into the leverage issue. The retaking of large portions of Kupiansk is a very direct way to strip Russia of leverage. However, what Ukraine's success in that direction also means is that more people will wake up to the reality that Putin's version of events can't be trusted. Russia was lying about Kupiansk back in November. If that's the case, how many other advances has the country fabricated to gain more leverage? That question will be asked in many countries, particularly the US, after Ukraine's exploits in Kupiansk. Third and finally, there's what Kupiansk itself means as a strategic location in the context of the war. There are good reasons why Russia has spent so long pushing for the city, and they don't all come down to peace negotiations and leverage. Russia has been trying to capture Kupiansk for over 2 years before Ukraine's December 12th counterattack. As Euromaidan Press points out, Kupiansk is a key logistical and railway node in Kharkiv. Russia had hoped to take the city to enable further deployments to the south and east. Now, Ukraine can both reinforce those directions and push on from them, forcing Russia's forces even further back. Holding its position in Kupiansk would also allow Russia to provide its soldiers fighting to capture the city of Kharkiv with support from the flanks. That support has now disappeared. Plus, holding Kupiansk would allow Russia to continue supplying its soldiers in the Donbass, which is key to maintaining the narrative of complete Russian domination in that direction. So it wasn't just stories that Ukraine shattered on December 12th, it was Russia's strategy. The Kremlin is now in disarray, as it has to scramble to maintain the charade that it's created. And speaking of the Donbass, Pokrovsk is another city that Russia has claimed to have taken, though it hasn't done so. Right now, there are ditches of death in Pokrovsk that Ukraine is filling with the bodies of Russian soldiers as it annihilates the country's assault waves. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of the reality in Ukraine that the Kremlin wants to hide. And thank you, as always, for watching.